All right, Alexander, it looks like Macron's plan to diffuse the Paris protests has indeed failed. On Saturday, the Yellow Vests are launching what they call Act 4, where they will be marching onto the Elysee. And Macron has announced that he will be deploying 89,000 police officers and security forces around the country in order to prevent violence. And there's been rumors that there will be violence and that they're preparing the people that are marching. Supposedly, they're going to be armed. At least that's what the government is saying. Who knows at this point? But it looks like that Saturday is going to be one hell of a day in France. What do you make of this?
Well, I think this is typical Macron. I think he's taking an incredibly confrontational line. I think deploying 89,000 police, security forces, bringing out all the weight of the machinery of the state down to bear against these people is much more likely to provoke violence than to deter it. Because, I mean, it makes it far more likely that there's going to be violent incidents of some kind. I mean, it will attract some people who will want to attack the police and the security forces that have been deployed, and it will almost certainly provoke a response. This is entirely the wrong way to go about these things. What Macron needs to do, or should have been doing, I don't think he's capable of doing it, is he ought to be saying, I understand these people. I understand how hard life is for them. I understand that, my government made mistakes. I got it wrong on this. I apologize. I'm prepared to think again and to look for ways forward and to act as the president of all the French people in order to try and come to some sort of compromise or resolution which will keep France united and moving forward. Militarizing France, which is essentially what he's doing, and bringing out all the forces of the state in this way against his own people, frankly, smacks of a president who is feeling increasingly insecure and who is worried about revolution. And if you go to our website, you will see that there's already articles in which we hear wild talk coming out of the French government about them being frightened of a coup on Saturday. I mean, a coup by whom? A coup against Macron. How would that be organized if he wants to bring down his own regime, his own government, himself as president? Then talking this kind of language is exactly the way to do it.
All right, yeah. This thing pretty much doesn't have a definite leader, but there are some people that have been singled out as leading the Yellow Vests de facto.
Yes.
On Facebook, they did a post and they said to all the people on the protest, stay the course, prepare for Act 4. I'm going to read you a quote from Zero Hedge and then a quote from the Figaro. I want you to comment on it. From Zero Hedge, it says, on Thursday, Yellow Vest leader Eric Drouet said, Saturday, and I quote, Saturday will be the final outcome. Saturday is the Elysee. Adding, we all would like to go to the Elysee. And Le Figaro also reports that Saturday's demonstrations may involve unprecedented violence, as it may include a hardcore radicalized element from both the extreme right and the extreme left. What do you make of those statements?
Well, first of all, I mean, let's talk about the fact that this is a spontaneous mass movement. Most revolutions start with spontaneous mass movements. There were no clearly defined leaders when the Bastille was stormed. There was no clearly defined leaders when the Tsar was forced to abdicate in February in Russia in 1917. Lenin was in Switzerland at the time. He had nothing to do with it. So it is not surprising that people are talking in this fashion, that there is a wild languages and talk of threats when the government itself is using this inflammatory and incendiary language. It is not talking about these protesters who are French people as if they were themselves French people who are exercising legitimate grievances and the right to protest. It is, as I said, threatening them. And of course, they are responding back. and they're becoming increasingly angry with the French president and with the French government that treats them not as French citizens with genuine grievances, but as a threat to the political and social order. And if you treat ordinary people in that way, then they do become a threat to the political and social order, and that is how revolutions happen.
What do you make of the reports that the French Parliament and parties in the French Parliament are actually working to vote for no confidence for Macron and his government?
Right. Well, first of all, I mean, Macron's party has a big majority in the French Parliament. But when we talk about it as a party, it's not even really a party. We're going back to the way that Macron became president, and we've discussed this many times, and about how the way it was done in a most manipulated and a rigged election. The party that he cobbled together is a mishmash of various people, lots of them not really professional politicians. It is entirely possible, it seems to me, that if we see major violence in Paris on Saturday, and if it becomes clear that it is the French security forces under Macron's guidance who are precipitating much of this violence, as they might very well be, it is entirely possible that we could see a revolt in the French Parliament against him. If the Parliament turns against him, then I think his position starts to look extremely vulnerable indeed, to the point where it might even start to become untenable. We are not there yet, but I repeat, he is going about it in the best possible way to achieve that outcome.
Who's advising him? Why is he doing this? Is he just that thick-headed?
I think he is, to be frank. I mean, my impression of Macron is that he is an extraordinarily vain, extremely arrogant man. He compares with himself with Napoleon. He compares himself with Jupiter. He lectures Vladimir Putin about Russian history and talks about Peter the Great and explains to Putin how Peter the Great had all kinds of policies, which, I mean, it was an extraordinarily offensive thing today to say. He offends Donald Trump by talking about nationalism and how superior patriotism is to nationalism. Absurd philosophical points that are really of no interest to anybody. He is annoyed Angela Merkel and the Germans by talking about banking unions. He is an arrogant, vain, impetuous man. But because of the way he came to power, without a particularly strong political force around him, he also lacks advisors and people around him who can both advise him intelligently and restrain him. All the people around him seem to be yes men, rather like the kind of people you would expect a person like that to have. So he doesn't have good advisors, and he's not too bright. Mm-hmm.
All right, so they tried the ploy by saying, okay, we'll put a 6-month delay on this fuel tax hike. So they tried that. It didn't work. What next steps can they actually do? Constructive next steps, constructive policy can the Macron government do to put a lid on these protests?
Right, there's two things they need to do, and they're very urgent. Firstly, I mean, not put a 6-month moratorium on these hikes. They need to cancel them. And they need to throw open this whole thing for discussion and to do it properly. I mean, that's the first thing they need to do, because this is what's been driving the protests to start with. Saying that they're going to freeze them for 6 months merely means that they intend to do them after 6 months. Otherwise, why freeze them for that period? So that's the first thing they need to do. The second is Macron carried out a lot of tax changes, which were perceived in France to benefit the rich. Now, he's got to do something over the next couple of weeks that gives ordinary people in France, the hard-working, middle-class people who are driving these protests, a sense that their concerns are being listened to. That could be tax breaks for them. That could be all sorts of things. I mean, he's got to stop pressing ahead with his pension reforms, for example. He's been talking about pension reforms. He's got to stop put on ice these education changes that he's talking about. He's got to slow down and he's got to start listening. And if he does that, yes, he will come across as a weakened leader. But, a wise leader takes a step back, talks to people, diffuses the tensions, thinks things through, and then when their political position has stabilized, that's the point when they move forward. Macron is one of these people who doesn't seem to have a reverse gear.
Yeah, he's not very wise either, that's for sure.
No,
At least that's what's playing out right now.
Well, it's evidently, he's completely misunderstood France. He's completely misunderstood the French people. My impression of him, frankly, is that he doesn't like them very much. I mean, if we look at political leaders who succeed, if we look at people like Donald Trump, who's, whatever one may think of him, a very effective politician in the United States, he gives the impression that he likes the people who form his electoral base. If we look at Vladimir Putin, it is the same. He likes the people who form his electoral base. Emmanuel Macron doesn't care about them. He sees himself as Jupiter or Napoleon. He commands, they follow. And that's as far as it goes with him. And if they step out of line, he brings out his police, his security forces. He talks wildly about threats of revolution. He talks about suppression. In other words, he doesn't accept that other people have a right to a point of view.
Yeah, because, he never really campaigned to win an election, Macron. He was just kind of placed in that seat.
Exactly. An experienced politician, somebody who's had to work their way up, who's fought to become president, would know how to work with people on the ground. They would understand the importance of cultivating the grassroots, of listening to people, of building an electoral coalition, of understanding what people's concerns are, and of the importance of representing their interests when they achieve political power. Macron doesn't think like that. He sees himself as this great Jupiter figure who has somehow inherited the presidency by some sort of divine right, who can decree whatever outcome he chooses. And it doesn't work like that in politics, at least not in democratic politics.
Yeah, and he's going to build EU armies and all kinds of fantasies.
Well, this is it. He goes off and he talks about climate change. Now, many people have different views about climate change. I personally, as somebody who considers climate change to be a serious issue, but the way he's doing it, there's been this response, you care about the end of the planet, and they come back, the people who are protesting, and they say, we care about where we're going to be at the end of the month when our money runs out, our wages run out. And he has shown no understanding that they have these concerns. I should say that whatever your views about climate change, I don't believe that this tax hike on diesel has anything to do with the planet. The money isn't going to any ecological purpose. It's going straight into the budget. In other words, it's an austerity measure, a tax rise, an austerity measure to try and balance the budget, to impress the Germans, who Macron, for his globalist agenda, wants to impress, because he wants them to come on side with his various grandiose ideas about how Europe should be reshaped. And the result is that people feel very angry and very betrayed, and they don't see that there is a president in France who cares about them, or who's interested in them, or who likes them, or who represents them.
Because he doesn't.
Because he does. Well, exactly. Precisely, he doesn't. He doesn't. He doesn't. He's got all his other grand ideas, which are really of no interest to the French people. And in fact, to the extent that they understand or care about his ideas, they don't like them. They really don't like them. And as we've discussed this on other programs, talking about how nationalism is a bad thing in France or anywhere else is something that is so contrary to the French national spirit that, it's difficult to know where to start in order to discuss this. It shows an ignorance of French history and of French people and a contempt for French culture.
Yeah, hate your culture, hate France, and here's a fuel tax hike.
Exactly.
It's just this. You can't have a bigger FU to the population.
Well, exactly. That's exactly how they feel. And I mean, if you do that, if you put up two fingers at them, they don't be surprised or angry when they put up two fingers at you. I mean, that's exactly what's going to happen. That's exactly what's happened over the last few weeks. And of course, this thing is now snowballing. We'd started with a protest about diesel oil. It's now spreading with more and more people joining in with all kinds of other grievances. We've got high school children complaining about changes to the education and examination system. We've got transport workers angry and upset about that. There's apparently grievances in the police, who are, of course, the organization that Macron is increasingly depending on. He's quarreled with the army, whose chief of staff he sacked in the most bizarre way a couple of months ago. I mean, his popularity is now down to 23%. In other words, it's fallen since these protests started a few weeks ago. And if he carries on like this, I don't think he'll have much support left.
All right. Well, it all comes to a head on Saturday. Let's see what happens. We'll be on top of it.
Let's see, indeed.
All right. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Guys, go to the Duran shop, pick up a T-shirt. They're demonetizing us. Every shirt that you buy really helps us. So pick up a T-shirt, and you can also donate to the Duran. The links for PayPal and Patreon in the description box down below. And all of our videos are also in podcast format, so you will also find a link to Apple iTunes and to Soundcloud as well, so you can get the audio of this show and every show that we have put out. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran, thank you very much. Until next time, take care.